And we're live. Welcome to the Liquid Swan channel. I'm here to interview Luddic Path. How are you doing, Luddic?
Hey, Liquid Swan. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure. I'm doing great. How about you?
Same. I mean, it's early in the morning, but that's just the way things got to be when we're doing international stuff, right?
You mean you have really soldiered on with this stuff because you're up now at 4:30 or something. It's sort of unheard of. I mean, for me, it's like a leisurely 1:30 in the afternoon. So
A, li-
I'm just comfortable here with my coffee. Yeah.
a Lindy chat on your end. I mean, I'm just battling sleep, sleep demons.
But it, but
Um,
but it's
but
it's good sometimes you have lucid moments, like when you're in this kind of half sleep, half awake zone. At least I know that for me, it's a good creative time. So something
that's
good might come of it, I think.
that's true. Yeah, I do find I have a little bit more energy in some ways. Um, so, anyways, let's get started. So, tell me about you and how did you get into what are you doing now? Again, and what are you doing essentially?
Uh, who am I? These are big questions. So I
Yes.
guess we have to just start with the basics. For the people who at least know me online, they would know me as a co-host on the Longhouse stream. That's a stream that goes every week on Thursdays at 8 o'clock Central European Time, where I do about 1 hour to 90 minutes of content with a walrus. So we're
Hmm.
both Norwegians. So we've been trying to cover more kind of Scandinavian or Eurocentric news because I guess there's a lot of people around the content that is going on in the Anglosphere and the sort of in the United States sphere. And to some point, I think it's necessary to try to cover a little bit more of what's going on in other parts of the world because I don't see people doing that in a very productive way. So
Hmm.
but not to go too much off track, I co-host this show. Some people know me from my YouTube, where I've sort of done some meme posting. I have a Twitter account as well, with where I just do some more commentary on political stuff that I'm interested in, or it might just be like personal things that I talk about. And of course, I'm also involved with Beowulf, just like you, where I've been working as an editor for praxarchy.com. And been doing that for over a year now. We've been doing it involved together. You've been a writer. So, I mean, there's been a lot of changes to Praxarchy. Right now, we have a different engine, and we're doing a lot more of republishing Substacks instead of doing kind of just our own thing.
Hmm.
So that's kind of an interesting project. We could talk a little bit more. So personally, I'm a millennial, family man at this point, and I work in software. I think it's a quite standard description for people in our spheres, like this kind of bourgeois software
Middle.
dev right winger thing.
Yeah. Middle
I think
class.
it's quite not unusual, not nothing out of the ordinary. I think the only thing that I think sets me apart a little bit is being from a kind of a non-Anglosphere Western country,
So when
which it
you
seems to, yeah.
so when you and Walrus started the Longhouse channel or show, what made you go for English instead of Norwegian, for example?
The lack of audience was probably
Hmm.
the problem. We wanted it to be actually pan-Scandinavian, so we talked to some people, and the problem there is that okay, you have four different languages, or at least on the surface. Like there's of
Hmm.
course the Samis and different dialects that are acknowledged as languages in at least in Norway. That I mean, it's kind of irrelevant. But the problem is that even within that sphere, if you just done it in Norwegian, you would have had communications issues with some of the Scandi countries. None of the English speakers would have been able to listen in, and I mean, generally, the level of English literacy is very good in the Scandinavian sphere.
Hmm.
So it would be, we figured it would be easier both to plug into some of the audience that already existed and to also have a message that could be understood by the Scandis. So
Yeah, that's
that's,
true.
in the end, I think if we were running it like a 100% Scandinavian podcast, we might have, I think, 10th to 100th of the viewership. That's
Right.
not an exaggeration. I mean, we could
Yeah.
probably find some people who were like diehard who always showed up, but it's it's very strange the kind of political environment that is in various Scandi countries and how it maps onto and or doesn't map onto the kind of Anglosphere or like broader Western American centric view of politics.
Hmm. Well, when I went to Iceland, and so it was a totally different area essentially, but when I went to Iceland, there was this Norwegian woman that was coming from the United States and going back to Norway, and I guess she lived in a small village. And that's where I got my first taste of like what's happening in Norway, because she said something like there's like villages she couldn't go to because of Muslim gangs or something like that. I don't know if that's true, but that's what she told us.
Well, it might not be that unlikely. There are, yeah, I mean, usually when they allocate these refugees or these immigrants, they would be stationed. At least they're sort of trying to put them in more remote places, even
Oh,
though they want to live urban places, right? That's in the end they will usually just migrate into the city centers anyway.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, as far as I know, there's no sort of designated no-go zones in Norway, the same way that you have in Sweden, for example, but I would not be surprised if there are areas that are like because of the high immigrant population, if it's like very densely Muslim, kind of like low, not very integrated populations, that this is something you would avoid. I
Hmm.
think it's quite likely. So I don't know if she said anything particular about these locations or
This would
where
have been
they
back
were,
in
but
like this would have been like 2015, so it's quite a long time ago. But I don't know
yeah,
if
but
it's
that was in the immigration crisis, right?
yeah, yeah,
I think
makes
there was
sense.
a much higher inflow into certain areas. So I mean, it is the sort of thing that if you're affected by it, you really notice it. And for some of the people who just live in the unaffected areas, they're completely oblivious
Yeah, that's
until.
true.
But I mean, white flight is a real thing. It doesn't matter where you go. I think in the world. Usually, like non-Westerners, whatever. I try to use sanitized language here, but say like non-Western, non-European populations, they move in, and or at least populations with backgrounds from non-Western countries, they move in, and then the Western Europeans, they move out.
Hmm.
Even other sort of like what you consider more Caucasian populations, it's really the same all over.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I also visited Sweden. I haven't been to Norway myself, but I went to Sweden and a couple years ago, and I had a family in the southeast, and they were really they're really anti-immigrant there. It's more of a rural area, like around Kalmar, and oh, it was interesting because we're talking. Cause my cousin, he's a conservative, I suppose he calls himself, which is sort of not as right wing, I guess, there compared to, let's say, even Canada, where the conservatives are more, I guess you could say, extreme. But it was interesting talking to him because I expected to hear like the typical like Stockholm sort of Stockholm syndrome in some sense in regards to immigration, but they seem to be more, let's say, nervous about it, I suppose. But they are rural people, and rural people actually reproduce. So maybe it'll all kind of come out in the wash in the end, you know?
Yeah, I do think at least you have a better foundation for higher fertility rates in these rural areas, even though there's a trend towards urbanization. Generally, what you do see also in Norway is that the rural populations will be more right wing. I think this is the pattern everywhere you go. The people
Hmm.
who live in city centers are more lib, and then they get, I guess you could say, harder conservative, without using that word in a way that, because like especially in our circles, the word conservative has become almost a pejorative.
Yeah.
Like they say, well, you will associate you with people like David French or the Daily Wire or something like this. It's like some very sort of particular liberal conservative type, more, very sort of strict autistic constitutional thing. But I'm talking more as a general temperament
Yeah. Yeah.
than than any kind of strict adherence to constitutional policies. And like exactly what the mechanisms are for why rural people are more conservative, it's not entirely clear to me when if it's like the all of the libs just move into the town and therefore it's concentrated, or being in big cities makes you more liberal. Uh, it's yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but this is just the pattern. This is how the chessboard looks.
Yeah, it seems to
As
be.
far as Swedes, I think there's there is a growing, and every year there's a growing anti-immigrant sentiment, especially considering the uptake in gang violence. Right, that's what you're seeing with seeing in Sweden. You're seeing it in Norway as well in a smaller degree.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's both the escalation of the violence and the methods and sort of the innocents that are being implicated, in addition to the fact that demographically these gangs are getting younger. So
Hmm.
it seems like, previously it was considered this would be people like 18 plus, 16 plus, but now it's like there's more people who are getting into it that maybe 12 around there and things. I mean, yeah, you're really seeing it. This is a typical thing with it's not just it's not just solely immigrant thing either. I mean, young people are usually more criminal than older people.
Are they bringing in
But
like Swedes into these gangs, or?
no, no, they're not.
Oh, okay.
I suspect that at some point there would be some crossover effect there with
Hmm.
younger people, even the ethnic natives, getting involved or affected by this on some level without knowing the details. And I'm not sure how easily it would be to get the facts or sort of the statistics on this. And
Yeah,
I mean, my child is sort of too young to be involved in this at this point, and I'm not even sure if this is an area where it would. I would be able to see it clearly enough. You know, either you're in there or you aren't.
yeah.
So
You'll
it's
even in Canada, like there's a lot of we obviously get a lot of immigration, even per capita. Like I think we get at least double what the UK gets. And the UK's like they're smaller, obviously, but per capita, our immigration's like double. Um,
yeah.
but
I've
there's
looked at some numbers. It looked absolutely cuckoo to me. So I don't envy the situation. I know that there's more inhabitable space. At least I assume in Canada. But there's at one point it just becomes unsustainable from an integration perspective.
well, it's so bad. Like there's not like we have like Bangladeshi families living in like Brampton, Ontario, and they got like 26 mattresses on the floor. Like, and it's just all they're doing is Uber Eats deliveries. Like, it's fucking, it's getting
Uh,
crazy.
uh, uh, That's a lot of Uber Eats. I mean, I've always seen these. I know there are, of course, other factors that are going into this, but
Yeah.
these kind of like food delivery services as some of the drivers for immigration. I think Maven Politic, if you follow him on Twitter, he had a thread about this. Because there are different names for it. You know, I think there was some of those who are operating in Scandinavia, like Foodora, for example.
Hmm.
You had Dorito or something that operates in the UK. It's but it's kind of, I don't know if they're using the bicycles in Canada. Maybe it's a larger space, but in say smaller places where it's we have walkable cities or it's easier to bike. Say like if you're in the Netherlands or Amsterdam or Denmark or something, they have more. A lot more of these food services have moved on to just they just have like a bike in a basket. You know, like this large
Yeah.
purple green basket, and they just bike around with their mobile phones and just use Google Maps to find addresses or the moped, like the Albanian on the moped cliche from Bowden.
Yeah. It's not that bad here. Like, we do, they're mostly drivers because like you just have to go too far. But
Okay,
still, like,
yeah, it's kind of more stretched out like it is in the United States.
yeah,
Or I'm
yeah.
not sure how the Canadian cities are constructed. I know when I visited the U.S., I realized just how car focused everything was. So like a bicycle is almost like a non-option. You're sort of consider it's almost like weird or almost like borderline criminal to have to use a bike because everything is sort of so much space and there's so much road that's just kind of been paved from station to station to station. So
Yeah. It's sort of like
yeah,
you drive your car
obviously,
between gas stations, essentially,
yeah.
or truck
But again,
stops.
my point was that I think that these businesses are when you, I mean, you can't put pain it all on them, but I've seen it sort of. They really are trying to get immigrants into these jobs. I even got adverts on social media for it, where they try to, I mean, do you want like a citizenship or something? If you're
Yeah.
interested in getting a Norwegian citizenship, you could apply for this, and you can get a job, bicycling food,
Well,
which
here what
I
they'll
think too. Yeah.
Uh, Well, here what they'll do is like
So,
one Indian guy will come, and then he'll so for some reason he'll have his like work permit, and then he'll use that work permit to get ever one of his cousins that aren't signed up for whatever, they'll sign up for Uber Eats through his number. So it looks like there's one guy working like the amount of hours that like like 7 guys who are working. So he's doing like 200 hours a week delivering, food or whatever. But it's actually just like
I,
seven dudes.
I don't know if that would crush his tax returns or not, but
Oh,
this is
it
like the
does.
standard you know,
It does, but he doesn't
standard
care.
Indian model, right? I think there was sort of British colonialists who talked about this, that if they try to move factories into India, for example, and they give one guy a job, that means that you give his entire family a job. Let's say you have like a sewing factory or something, then okay, you give Pajit a job, then it's like Pajit Senior will show up the next day, and Mommy Pajit and Pajit Junior will come the next day, or so, and it's completely. It's not something that's easily comprehended by the Western
Y-
mind, I think.
Yeah, it's
But
very helter
it's
skelter.
yeah,
What's that?
it's difficult, and I mean, there you go already with these sort of issues with just trying to integrate people, because it was never meant to be, like one job for 7 people, or I don't know how exactly they order this stuff, but I mean, some of these jobs, especially if you have a cell phone and you have a car, then you almost don't have to do anything at all. You just type in coordinates or something, and it kind of does itself. You just need to stay awake.
Yeah, you just sort of move your body
Or,
from one place to another. You know, it's like the
so
ultimate,
yeah, it is.
just a terrible job, really.
It's a very sad state of affairs. I mean, I do recognize the necessity of these of logistics workers, of course, to a
Yeah,
certain degree. But I wish people would just pick up their own food for like everybody's safety and health. At some point, if there's something I could just campaign for, it's just people just you can just go to McDonald's or the gas station and pick up the food yourself. You don't have to have everything shipped to your door. I,
yeah,
I, I
like
get the convenience argument. It's just so silly to pay extra money for this.
a lot bugs me like you wouldn't believe. I got like, there's a guy I know that I think he told me his wife spent $1,500 on Uber Eats and whatnot. I was like, what the? That's like, and and that's just over like a period of a couple months. That's like, well,
And
you gotta get her to cook. I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I just don't get it. It's like the same with credit cards. Sometimes I watch these kind of financial shows on YouTube. I think Abe Walrus talked about it on the stream. There's a show on YouTube. It's called the YouTuber's called Caleb Hammer, and he just brings on these basket cases to talk about their finances.
Mm,
And it's always that like they use credit cards to buy Uber Eats, or that's why they're in debt, because they have like these enormously terrible habits. But I'm just shocked at how commonplace it is, and that the economic recessions that we've gone through, either from the lockdowns or from the kind of high interest rate environment, or well, at least higher interest rate, increased interest rate environment that we're in currently,
mm.
that it's not had it doesn't seem to have had the proper disciplining effect on people.
It's
I'm just
interesting.
so surprised that yeah.
So isn't it so in Scandinavia, people don't use credit cards essentially unless it's like for a certain, let's say, particular reason.
Well, I think that, well, they borrow a lot of money. I can tell you that when it
Mm,
comes to, let's say, like mortgages, for example. They love mortgage debt, which is, of course, at least in finance terms, considered good debt. But the problem is that if you're completely over leveraged, it becomes an issue. But they will take out a line of credit for their mortgage
mm-hmm.
it's always at a floating interest rate, and that's the risk. Sorry, that's
That's true.
the risk factor here. I think I don't know how it's like in Canada, but in the United States they have secured like low regular interest rates. That is sort of it's going to be 3%, for example. That's the usual thing for a mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like that in other places in the world, and in Europe, Scandinavia. You always have a floating interest rate, and you can say tie down your interest rate for 3 years, but then you have to renegotiate when that time period's up, and so you're basically making a gamble then.
Yeah, same in Canada. In the States, you can lock in for 30 years at whatever. Like if it was the 1% rate, you could have locked in for 30 years with that. In Canada, you have to like you pay different rates based on how many years you go in. You can get put quite a long rate, but you end up paying for it. So like if you go 10 years, you're going to pay usually higher rate than say a 3 year because the rate could change in between those periods. So the bank figures they're taking a risk, so they charge more for the longer one. I usually go
Yeah,
for whatever's like the lowest, 3 to 5 year period. Like my last one I got was 1.74, and I locked in for 5 years, which was nice. Uh, but yeah, I'm
And
kind of jealous of the Americans for that because like if you just hold off until the rates are low, you could have 30 years of complete stability, right?
I mean, it's the one place where the Europeans look at Americans and they're jealous because of their market socialism or whatever. I mean, in everything else, I think they're Europeans have it easier, but that's the one place I look to. The United States. It's like, yeah, they got it good. But yeah, back to the Norwegian credit card
Mhm.
situation. They don't use credit cards as much simply because the digital infrastructure is a lot better in Scandinavia in general, meaning that debit cards are charged less and are easier to use.
Mhm.
That I think that's one of the reasons that people in the United States prefer credit cards is that there's like low transaction costs
That makes
and
sense.
they're quick. They're very fast. When it comes to debit cards in the US, they will have a higher transaction cost. Usually, you can't seem to use them that well. Maybe it's changed lately, but it has something to do with the lacking of public digital infrastructure and the competitive nature of these companies that are not willing to share data and infrastructure.
Yeah,
So in Norway, that's
do you guys have like an Interac system? Like here we have Interac, which is like a debit system. A lot of the credit unions, which are sort of like small banks, or more local banks, they like kind of have united to sort of share it. Do you guys have something like that there?
you have to explain maybe a little bit more how that
It's
works.
like it's like debit cards essentially.
Well, yeah, I've just not had it described that way, but
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
there's something like it. It's I mean, at least the banks are sort of the at least the legal frame of how the banks have to exist in Norway. It's very set. It's not a
Mm,
profitable business to be in, to be like a sort of commercial bank. Usually, in terms of like if you'd wanted to be an investor in a commercial bank, it's not a great prospect considering that it's very regulated
mm,
for for good or for worse. But because of that, they use less credit cards, but they still have other issues like say consumer loans, for example. Which I mean, it is also credit, but it's a little bit different because you take them out through these kind of smaller banks
yeah, that makes sense.
with high interest, and it's usually sort of tied to just consumption. Where say like you have a company that delivers computer parts, for example, and they will just
Mm,
offer you like a consumer loan. Oh, you can't afford like a new random access memory, or you want like a graphics card to mine Bitcoin, then we can give you a consumer loan to cover the full cost or something if you want a better gamer rig. It's stuff like that. So
yeah.
that's the kind of bad debt, but there's also just way too much good debt, considering that yeah, the Norwegians love to just max out their mortgages and they remortgage to if you want to refurnish their houses or do
Oh,
any kind
yeah.
of upgrades. So just or they remortgage and use that money to buy a car or something. It's actually quite normal.
That does happen here quite a bit. But there's like there's two different sides to it. There's one where they kind of like they'll find a consumer purchase like a car that they need, so it's an older person, so they'll put it in their mortgage because the interest rate's lower on the mortgage, obviously. Um, but then some of them, some boomers, they'll like remortgage their house to pay off, like to keep paying their mortgage. And I know it's one idiot that did that, and they end up losing their house after like 25 years of this because it eventually it kind of hit a wall. Um, but it's sort of like that boomer cruise idea where like they don't care. They'll just like keep doing it until because they're just cruising, right? They don't have to think about the
He
future.
hopes that he's going to die before the check is called.
Yeah, my
I
stepdad
don't
did
know.
that.
Wow. Well, the bank
But
has to take some responsibility, right? They can't just allow people to do stuff like this. But again, I'm not. I won't excuse the boomers too much. But yeah, I know that that's possible. I just haven't heard too many examples of people who remortgage to pay the mortgage.
yeah, it blows my mind. Well, because in Canada, right, these boomers bought their houses for like $60,000, and now they're worth 1 million, or sometimes like 1.5 million. So they've just been like remortgaging. They haven't really paid it off. They sort of go on these like 5 year cycles where they remortgage at a different interest rate, but by the time they did it, now their house value has gone up. So that's why I kind of started thinking that this shit's going to collapse because it just keeps building the debt higher and higher and never really attacking the principal. And this isn't the case for everybody. Lots of people pay their mortgages normally, but there's lots of people, like I'd say over 10% anyways, that do this sort of compounding thing, and that's a little scary. And it makes you kind of wonder if that's like what's causing some of the inflation, because the bank can keep basically just giving money into the economy because the magical housing price number goes up. I don't know. It's
Well,
pretty
yeah,
crazy.
it is causing the inflation, but of course, I don't know how the bank is regulated in Canada. But usually, there will be some type of inflationary goal that they try to set. Like they try to aim for 1 or 2% or something, and
Hmm.
now because they have that goal, that's why the interest rate is going up because it's too much inflation now.
Hmm.
And they're trying to curb it, but it will never reverse. It will only just keep going up at if the bankers get their way at sort of slower pace and um, yeah. So, but yeah, this stuff not working. I mean, that's. I think they're getting worried now, especially with the global sort of population collapse
Yeah,
and lowering global fertility. That they just have to call the checks now because there might not be enough people to pay that stuff off in the future.
I think they're totally screwed. But so coming up close on the half-hour mark. But so I have one question for you that we can maybe go into as we exit. Um,
Yeah,
what's like what are your predictions of the future? And if you have any white pills for us, what would you give us?
well, the white pills. I mean, it does depend on what kind of position that you're coming from, but I think the future actually offers a lot of. I mean, there's a lot of doomerism, right, in the E
Hmm.
right with regards to. Well, what are the things? So the immigration, I guess, is one thing. Degeneracy is another thing. Population collapse. There's so many narratives that are running around, like that people are worried about. I think the from my perspective, there seems to, at least from the perspective of the European elites and the kind of what's considered like the WEF crowd, there has been a kind of shift. These people
Hmm.
are, in my view, like they're mostly very sort of technocratic in their way of thinking, which is, as many people say, like Morgoth points out in these essays, that there's a sort of inhumanity and technocracy, and in like the way they look at immigration and replacement and line go upisms, these kinds of
Hmm.
things. But the I think the advantage or sort of the white pill in that is that they basically look at things like immigration and the numbers around it, and they look at global fertility collapse, and they basically come to the conclusion that like that strategy won't work.
Hmm.
They're not going to be able to maintain the social cohesion. They won't be able to maintain like the metrics that they care about by just bringing in more third worlders.
Hmm.
And as a result, you are seeing a lot of shifts in policy. It's not just one place. It's happening in many places at the same time, as it always does, with more, I guess, the Overton window, if you want to call it that or whatever, or at least people who are in key decision-making positions talking more about immigration restrictions and reforms. I mean,
Hmm.
currently there's reforms going around in Europe with these, like what the UK calls the Rwanda plan, or offshoring of refugees and immigrants, for example,
Yeah, it
which is sort of,
seems
it's not.
it seems like because when they do bring them, when they do come, they go to the cities, which just like kind of grinds them up, uh, Spangler style, and like their birth rates are usually a little high at the beginning, but then they just collapse immediately, like the rest of us. I think Europeans actually, I think despite all the data, I think we're going to be okay because I think we have enough kids despite that, and I think when there's more space, when the population actually does collapse, there's probably going to be people having more kids anyway, so it's going to be easier. Like lot of millennials complain about like housing prices and low wages and stuff, but if a house costs like $5,
Well,
that's
yeah,
creates
I
this
do
room.
think that. I do think that as well. That I mean, at least the laws of supply and demand indicate that if there's no other interference in the market, that as the population collapses, then so will the demand for housing. And when that happens, then it will just be easier to get something cheaply.
Hmm.
And people can take advantage of that. There's a lot of pain to degrowth, but it opens up certain opportunities as well. But yeah, just to finish my point, it seems to become mainstream now, the idea to sort of offshore immigrants. And
Hmm.
like from a European perspective, has coughed a little bit. I mean, in the European problem, especially if we're talking about demographics and re-immigration, is that remigration is very difficult, especially when you're dealing with immigrants who have come through like 10 countries before they arrived where you live.
Hmm.
So that's, I mean, in the United States is a little bit easier because a lot of the immigrants come from Mexico, or at least the illegals. So it's sort of like this is a country that's on your border. You can sort of just have a proper wall there and just put them on the other side of that wall. I mean, you know, I know it's not that simple, but at least in the larger scheme, it's sort of okay. They came from there. It's on the border. You just secure the border and you put them back there. That's
Hmm.
easier, even though. But with the Europeans, say you have somebody who came into Sweden from Syria, for example, and there's a lot of travel to move them back into Syria, and it's very likely what often happens is that these countries won't accept them. Like you will present their data or their passports or something and send it to the Syrian government, and they'll just say we don't know who this is, or
Yeah.
we won't allow them to come back in. So that it sort of creates a lot of problems that you could do something about it, but you'd quickly end up creating maybe even more humanitarian disasters if you're going to go like full. Yeah, I don't know if you want to just
Bullshit them out.
be a little bit ruthless in your approach. So they will do things like say put them in a third country, for example, where they have to have all their papers processed until it's finished. So that might take years. So not only are you sort of keeping them out of the European countries, but it's also a very good deterrent for other people who are trying to get in there because they know that okay, they maybe they cross the border, but they'll just be shipped onto a third country where they might have to stay for 5 years or something, and so that might not be considered an option. And
Yeah.
as you said, with the immigrants that are coming here, they're experiencing the same. I mean, regardless of stuff that people like Andrew Tate will say, they are actually experiencing much faster decline in birth rates, and you're seeing it also in their countries as well as they're modernizing and coming in contact with it, and they have to modernize a lot faster than the European populations. Their birth rates are just absolutely tanking.
Hmm.
It's happening very very fast, and
Yeah.
they're not seeming to be able to hold on to a lot of a lot of that kind of old world attitude and these sort of old world values in the meeting with the modern West. So some of these things are not going to create as big a problem as I think a lot of people think it will. Even though like it's going to be rocky and it's going to be challenges, but it's not the sort of it's over in 10 years
Hmm.
predictions that I think a lot of people have been going with
Yeah.
in the far right.
A lot of people say like Africa is gonna like be the super powerhouse, but I don't believe that. I think they're gonna collapse faster than. I think they'll collapse back into what they were at some point.
Well, Africa just can't control itself politically. Like that's the problem. They just
Hmm.
lack the human capital to rule themselves. They're always going to. It's just well, unfortunate for them, but they're always going to be ruled by other countries. Even though they have positive birth rates, some of these countries also have very high death rates. Right, so that's something that has to be taken into account. They're not just going to modernize and maintain like an 8 child per woman birth rate, and then just explode into the stars. I mean, the countries there that have high birth rates also have high death rates. They don't live that long, and so the total population it's not going to grow as fast as I think a lot of people predict. And I mean, whether it's like okay, where the Western colonization seems to be retracting, there's Eastern colonization coming in. There's a lot of Russia is taking away France's colonies, and China is doing their own thing in Africa. So they're going to continue to be subjugated to larger powers because people need their resources and they want the working age men to work. I mean it's not easy. It becomes like this kind of road of what do you call that's the Empire of Dust or something, that documentary where they have
Yeah.
that meme from. So there's a lot of that's going to be going on, but because of the demographics problems that are facing both the East and the West, and Africa is going to continue to be a zone of interest because they have young people who can work and they can outsource manufacturing to there, and they also need their kind of natural resources for whether they're going to do nuclear or whatever solution they find to energy. So
Hmm.
with Africa itself becoming some type of superpower, that has never happened, and it probably will continue to not happen in the future. So that's also not something that I'm particularly worried about. With the, I mean, the Israeli situation, I guess, for a lot of people is a sort of quasi white pill. The I mean, I guess a lot of the, for good or for worse, a lot of the politically correct standards that have been maintained very thoroughly throughout the 19th and 2000s seems to be collapsing completely.
Mm,
And say people who want to discuss, Zionist power or like Jewish power, both in Israel and the United States and in the Western system, it seems to be a lot less taboo now.
mm,
I've even at my own workplace, I was able to just casually bring up the idea that the problem with Israel, it sort of stems from the fact that there's too much Jewish influence in the United States, or too many powerful Jews in key positions, and this was actually not pushed back on. I was sort of expecting
mm,
that I would get some kind of pearl clutching reactions or something there, but I actually had two people agreeing with me, and these are not necessarily like my workplace is sort of like centrist liberal boomers.
mm.
That's sort of like upper middle class centrist liberal boomers. That's almost everybody who works there, and they were actually in agreement very much that this
Same.
was a correct diagnosis. So it's very difficult now, I think, to put a lid on a lot of the stuff that's going on in the United States, and for people to sort of go along with Jewish influence, I think, the same way. So that's also, I guess you could say, a white pill in terms of the future.
Yeah, not being controlled by a minority interest group, it would be nice. Anyways, we're pretty much, we're over time now. But do you have any other last words you want to talk about before we go?
I think we had a nice conversation, so it'd be fun to come back at some point. And I guess I'll just have to shill for praxarchy.com for the people who are listening. You should go and read praxarchy.com.
All right, I will put that in the description once the VOD is up, and also your link to your Twitter if you're cool with that. If that's what you want.
Yeah, put it. That's fine.
Okay, and yeah, so I'll just I gotta wait about 10 seconds of silence because the delay. But it's very nice having you on, Luddic. Thanks for coming. You've been great. Hopefully have you on again, and talk to you soon.